Hello, listeners. You're tuned in to Storytime Audio, your go-to channel for captivating tales that touch the heart and ignite the imagination. Today, we're excited to present a poignant story titled, A Moment of Clarity, confronting the heartbreak of a cheating wife. In this emotional journey, we follow Alan, a devoted husband and father, as he grapples with the painful realization of his wife Emma's infidelity. What begins as a seemingly typical day spirals into a night of revelation and heartbreak, leading Alan to question the very foundation of his marriage. Join us as we delve into a story of love, betrayal, and the difficult path to finding one's true self amidst the shadows of doubt. Sit back, relax, and let Storytime Audio take you on a journey through this powerful narrative. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more stories that inspire and entertain. Let's begin. Emma stood in the hallway, staring silently at the suitcases, the laptop, and the briefcase. They lay where she hadn't noticed them when she walked in. She walked back into the room and looked at the man sitting in the shadows. "You're crazy, Alan. You're abandoning me and our two sons because of one fight? Because of one stupid mistake I made while drunk a few hours ago? I didn't have sex with anyone. I didn't betray you. You're just obsessed." When he didn't respond, she moved towards him, but he raised his hand again, signaling her to stop. She halted, confused and hurt. This man was not her husband, not the man she'd lived with for 8 years. No one could change so drastically in just a few hours. He'd never been like this before, never. "Can you tell me why? Can't you at least do that?" she asked, desperation creeping into her voice. "I had a moment of clarity," Alan said, but the words seemed hollow and meaningless to Emma. "A moment of clarity? What does that even mean? What did you see?" Though she couldn't see his face clearly, she felt his gaze fixate on her. It was a powerful, almost tangible force. "I saw our lives, Emma. I saw who we are, who we were, and who we've become. It has nothing to do with what happened at the party. You're right, leaving because of one fight, one mistake, would be crazy. But that's not why I'm leaving. I'm leaving because I've realized our marriage was a mistake, that I love you but you don't love me, that I've never satisfied you and probably never will. Deep down, you're a good woman and will never leave me because you keep your promises. But we're too young to ruin each other's lives for the next 40 or 50 years. That's why I'm leaving," Alan explained, his voice steady but filled with a resigned sorrow. About 3 hours earlier, Alan had pulled into the driveway at 8:30 p.m. His phone had been silent since he left the family gathering at the campsite south of Austin at 7 p.m., leaving Emma and about 75 of her relatives and friends to continue their monthly party tradition. They lived in a suburban neighborhood in Austin, Texas, known for its quiet streets and family-friendly atmosphere. The house was dark, except for the automatic yard light that illuminated the driveway. Alan felt much older than his 34 years, more like 74. But he only had to carry a 6-pack of Michelob Light into the house, so he managed. He turned on the kitchen light and sat down at the table where they usually ate, not in the little dining nook where they were supposed to. He unscrewed the lid of one Michelob and took a long sip of the delightfully cold drink, letting it slide down his throat. Then he took another sip, all the while waiting for the first ringing tone from his cell phone. Nothing. He looked at the pictures on the refrigerator door, drawn by their 5-year-old son, Billy, and the picture of their 7-year-old son, David, catching his first pass in a Pop Warner football game. His throat tightened, and he fought to keep from bursting into tears as he looked at David's dark-haired young face, so much like his mother's. Both boys had their mother's dark hair and light brown eyes. They and their mother were his world until a few hours ago. Now he was going to lose them all, and it felt like standing on the railroad tracks in the dark of night, waiting for an oncoming train, unable to move. Alan took another sip and leaned his head against the dark-stained wood of the table for a moment. He finished the bottle and forced himself to get up from the table. Sooner or later, the phone would ring, and then the front door would open. But until that happened, he had things to do. He went upstairs to the bedroom he and Emma had shared for 5 years, ever since they moved to this relatively expensive neighborhood in Austin. They had moved there because the schools were good. Alan taught an introductory English literature course at a small private liberal arts college across town. But he liked this neighborhood better than the area around the university, so he resigned himself to the hour-long daily commute. He opened the closet door and found the 2 suitcases they had used for their last cruise 2 years ago. Then he began opening drawers and pulling out as much clothing as he could find. He packed a week's worth of pants, shirts, and jackets. He didn't forget to pack a razor, toothbrush, toothpaste, and a few medications, everything he needed for a trip away from home. He leaned over the dresser, feeling the urge to vomit but fought it down. This trip wasn't going to end. It was an exile from everything he loved or had loved, and he was never going back. If he let himself think about it too much, he knew he would freeze, so he methodically started packing the things he needed to start his life over as a single man after 8 years of marriage. Alan found his laptop and briefcase with the papers he needed for his job. He moved everything into the hallway that led to the dining room, just to the left of the front door. They wouldn't be seen by anyone entering the house unless they went into the dining room. When he'd gathered what he could, he grabbed a carton of Michelob with 5 bottles left in it and went into the dining room. The front door opened into a hallway that led to the right and then into the den. Alan sat down in an upholstered chair at the far end of the room and set the beers on the glass coffee table in front of him. There was a floor lamp behind the chair, which he turned off. A light in the hallway could be turned on by anyone entering. He stood on the chair and loosened the light bulb in the center of the den so it wouldn't come on when the switch at the entrance to the den was flipped. With everything he needed ready, he reclined in the padded chair in the darkness of what had been his home, opened a second Michelob, and began to sip cautiously. Around 11 p.m., the cell phone rang for the first time. The screen lit up in the darkness, and he recognized Emma's phone number. He didn't bother to answer it. About 3 minutes later, it beeped, indicating a message waiting for him. He ignored it. 5 minutes after that, it rang again, and then another 3 minutes later, and another 5 minutes later, and another 10 minutes later, and another 5 minutes later. Emma rang, followed by her father Robert, her older brother Mark, and her younger sister Kelly, and then Emma again. If there were any humor left in the world, Alan would have found the parade of phone numbers funny, but the funny had died hours ago, and he didn't think he'd find anything funny for a long time, if ever. The house phone rang, then the cell phone, then the house phone again. Alan had just finished his second Michelob and was starting on his third. Time crawled by, refusing to run backward to let the day that had ruined his life unwind and give him a second chance. But even as he expressed this common human desire, he realized that what had happened had been brewing for more than one day and he would have to rewind time back at least 8 years to undo the consequences, and that wasn't going to happen. May had turned out to be warm but not unbearable. Usually, this time of year, the RV park and cabins south of Austin were nearly deserted. For Robert Carter, his family, and friends, it was a perfect place to hold their monthly dance party in a quiet area where no one would complain about the noise or call the police, allowing everyone to relax. Robert and his wife, Becky, had raised 9 children, 8 of whom were still alive. When all the kids gathered with other family members, uncles, aunts, and friends, there was usually a crowd of 100 or more adults. Robert and Becky had built a successful paving and asphalt company, making them millionaires by the time they were 60. They enjoyed hosting these monthly Saturday parties, which featured Southern rock, fried chicken, ribs, oysters in season, and plenty of beer and spirits for every taste. Emma and Alan didn't get to attend every month, but they tried to be there as often as possible. Robert and Becky did their best to welcome a Yankee from Massachusetts into their family, even though it was sometimes hard for them to understand Alan and his profession. He didn't sell cars, fix cars, build houses, develop parking lots, or make money in the ways that everyone else in their group did. Alan stood in front of bored young men and women and talked about poetry, novels, essays, and other things that most members of the Carter clan understood little about and cared even less. The drinking usually began around noon. There were cabins for those who needed to sleep off the excess booze, as well as several RVs. Emma and Alan sent their boys to stay with friends whose parents they trusted. They knew they might return that night or the next morning, as they often watched their friends' kids when needed. An old concrete dance pavilion was used mostly during Carter parties, equipped with a loudspeaker system. They ate and drank a little while people arrived and started drinking. By 5 p.m., dusk had fallen, the music got louder, and the drinking more intense. Emma would walk around and talk to people while Alan stood at one of the tables still piled high with food, eating grapes. Sometimes, Alan would just watch her for hours at these parties because dancing and drinking weren't his things. He marveled at how a stranger could come along and steal her away from the hordes of southern suitors who dreamed of her body and face. As usual, the combination of drinking, dancing, and seductive women and men was not the most peaceful. One of Kelly's sister's old flames dragged her to dance to a particularly wild tune and began entertaining her in front of everyone until her husband, Billy, jumped in and knocked him down with a thunderous punch. Eventually, everyone calmed down, the beer flowed, and not long after, the two men shook hands. The old flame got a kiss from his former lover, and Billy and Kelly went off to find a dark place to be alone, as they usually did at every party. The pavilion was getting crowded. Even Robert and Becky were moving to the beat of the southern rock when Alan noticed that he had lost sight of Emma. When he finally spotted her, his stomach clenched. She was slow dancing with a tall, dark-haired man in a plaid shirt and jeans. She was nestled comfortably in his arms. Jake Trescott was one of the men who had pursued Emma before Alan showed up at the insurance company where she was transferring his auto insurance. For some reason, she had taken a fancy to a stranger with an odd accent, and 6 months later, they were married. Jake had never been able to accept her decision. He still called and visited occasionally, and Emma insisted on seeing him as a friend, not an ex-boyfriend. At these parties, he always danced inappropriately close, touched things he shouldn't, and usually made some clever remark to and about Alan, much to the amusement of many. Alan made his way through the twilight toward the two of them. Watching them move together, he couldn't help but feel jealous. Emma had been drinking, not enough to be drunk, but enough to relax and snuggle up to Jake. Alan got close enough and said loud enough for them to hear, "Hey Jake, mind if I cut in?" Emma looked at him guilt-free and smiled lazily. "Hey babe, I was just having a little dance with old Jake. I promised him this dance. It's the dance from our prom. You don't mind if I finish it with him, do you?" Jake smirked, clearly enjoying the moment. Alan could see it as he touched Emma, but in the semi-darkness, only the three of them could see what was happening. Emma threw Jake a funny look and then looked at Alan. He tried to read her facial expression. Was she angry at Jake for what he was doing or at Alan for letting him do it? Alan tried to remain calm, but it was slipping away from him. "Jake, get your goddamn hands off my wife." Jake's smile grew even wider. "Or what, Alan? Jesus Christ, what kind of a man's name is Alan? Does that sound like a little girl's name? Hey Alan, that's gay." Alan stammered, "I don't care what you think of my name. Get your hands off my wife." Emma took her hand and pushed Jake's arm so that he let go of her. "Okay Jake, chill out. Why are you always acting like a jerk around Alan? He's my husband. He's not a jerk like you. You're always trying to get him into fights because you know you're going to kick his ass. That's not fair. And Alan, I'm not a little girl. Jake's a little drunk, but I can handle him. I've known him most of my life. You don't have to make a scene trying to save me. Hell, I might have to save you." Alan couldn't believe his ears. He now knew that several couples around them had heard the conversation and were giggling. "What the hell did you just say?" Emma's eyes widened, and Alan wondered if she'd even thought about what she'd said. "Oh Alan, I'm sorry baby. I didn't mean it. How the hell could you mean it?" Jake nudged her in the side. "She meant that if you stick your nose in my face, I'll kick your ass and smash your face in, you damned pencil-necked weirdo. The only reason I didn't do it sooner is because she keeps begging me not to hurt you." Alan couldn't help himself. "The one who can count to 10 without using his fingers, you redneck idiot. The one who came and took your girl away from you without bothering, the one who made 2 kids with her. I'm not even sure you can do that." Alan saw the swing coming even as he felt people coming up behind them. He moved to get out of the way when his foot slipped on what was probably someone's spilled drink. He fell on his ass and hit his head on the concrete pad. Emma's brother Mark and his friend walked over to Jake and grabbed him by both arms. Alan hit hard, and it knocked the spirit out of him for a moment. He was stunned. Jake didn't try to shake off the guys holding his arms, probably feeling that he had gotten the better of Alan. Robert Carter came up behind them and said in a hard voice, "Okay Jake, that's enough. We let you come to these parties because you're an old friend of ours, but you've crossed the line. Get out of here." Alan looked up at Jake's smirking face and then around at the faces surrounding him. He saw smiles or desperate attempts not to smile. Then he looked at his beloved wife's serious face and realized she was another one struggling with this. She thought it was funny. When Alan looked at her, she deliberately turned her face away toward her father. "Daddy, no. Jake just had a drink. He didn't mean anything by it. You know he and Alan are always fighting, but that doesn't mean anything. And anyway, I promised him this dance. Even Robert looked at his daughter with disbelief. Are you sure this is what you want, Emma? After what Jake said about your husband? She looked back at Alan, not smiling. Alan's a grown man, Dad. If he gets upset about something Jake does, he knows what he can do about it, right? Alan tucked his arms under him and rose to his feet. He just turned and walked away from his wife. Jake started laughing. Alan heard giggles and desperately wanted to believe that Emma wasn't among them, but he wasn't going to turn around to make sure. As Alan was leaving the dance floor, Robert caught up with him and spoke as he walked away. Son, I know you're pissed off right now, but listen to me. I know Emma loves you, whether you believe it now or not. But women, look, sometimes a woman, even the best woman, wants to know that her man will fight for her. Maybe they don't do that where you come from, but here, a woman will not respect a man who will back down from another man's attempt to move in on her. Do what you think is right, but even if Jake beats the crap out of you, at least fighting him will show her that you care enough about her to fight for her. Alan kept walking. You're right, Robert. Where I come from, women don't do that. A good woman wouldn't encourage some idiot to get into a situation where her husband has to fight for her, only if they love their husband, only if they have a real marriage. Now I'm not sure of either of those things. Robert grabbed Alan's hand, and Alan had enough respect for him not to lash out. Maybe you're right about her lack of respect for you. I'm only her father, I can't interfere with that. But I can tell you that she loves you. Don't do anything stupid right now. Just go somewhere, have a drink, and chill out. Things will sort themselves out. Maybe. And then Alan left Robert behind. As he walked away from the dance floor, his thoughts were in turmoil. He knew Robert meant well, but his advice didn't align with how Alan saw his own values and marriage. Fighting for Emma in a physical brawl wasn't the solution to their deeper problems. The driveway was illuminated by the headlights of a car pulling in at 12:45 a.m. Alan had drunk 1.5 Michelobs and felt somewhat calm. He heard car doors opening and voices. He opened the window next to the chair, even though it made the house feel chilly. When people parked because of the slope of the driveway, unless they were talking in a whisper, it seemed as though they were standing next to the window, and he could usually hear every word. He's here, came the voice of Emma's brother, Mark. Thank God. Son of a bitch, he's just a miserable bastard. Chill out. I know you're sober now after showing your ass like that. Just be glad he's here and not having fun with some random girl like most guys would be, said another voice, possibly one of the friends from the party. Shut up. He's my goddamn husband who goes off to sulk when his feelings are hurt and his wife is. Emma's voice broke off, angry and hurt. What kind of husband is that? The kind whose wife has fun with her ex-boyfriend right in front of him, you idiot. If you weren't my sister and didn't have those boys, I'd tell him to just dump your ass and go find someone who won't humiliate him in public, Mark spat. Alan couldn't believe what he was hearing. The front door opened, and they walked in. A moment later, a light bulb went on in the hallway, bursting into the den but only penetrating the center of the room. Alan sat in the dark. Mark entered the den first, Emma following on his heels. Mark looked around and saw Alan's figure sitting in the shadows in a padded chair. He stared at Alan for a moment, then said, "Hi, Alan." "Hi, Mark," Alan replied evenly. There was a seemingly endless silence. Alan wasn't going to be the first to speak to Emma. Finally, she said, "Alan." "Emma," Alan said in the same even, emotionless tone. "Are you okay?" asked Mark. "Fine, thanks for asking," Alan said, keeping his composure. "You bastard," Emma shouted, unable to hold back any longer. "I love you too, you idiot." She tensed up, and if Mark hadn't held out his hand, she might have lunged at Alan. Her hair was disheveled, her face flushed, her lipstick long since wiped off, and her white dress wrinkled and stained with dirt. The party must have been hellish after Alan left. Smart ass, always some smart ass. You think it's funny to leave me alone? Not tell anyone where you're going, just disappear? What kind of man does that? She screamed. I don't know. Probably some coward too scared to fight a man who entertains his wife with her permission in front of all their friends and relatives, Alan retorted. She blushed deeply, and Mark threw her a dirty look. You had us worried, Alan, Mark said. Why didn't you answer your cell phone? Any of your phones? I didn't feel like talking to anyone, Alan replied calmly. Mark rubbed his chin and shifted his gaze from Emma to Alan. I guess I'll leave you guys to talk. It's been a long night, a hell of a long night. I'm getting too old for this crap. Are you sure you're okay, Alan? I was just being polite, Mark. I'm not okay, and I don't know if I ever will be again. But that's not your problem. Thanks for getting Emma home. If it had been up to me, she could have gone home with Jake or gone camping in the RV parking lot. Mark gave them both another look, then shook his head. He looked at Emma. Leave then, Emma. Let you guys work it out yourselves. Walk me out, okay? Alan realized from their voices that they were standing outside Mark's Chevy Tahoe. Damn him, Mark, what an idiot he is. Any other guy would have thrown himself at Jake or gotten drunk or done something human, and he goes off and sulks at home. Home, he doesn't. I'd kick Jake's ass just like Tommy and most of the guys we know. Alan's not like that. He's not a fighter. You knew that when you decided to go after him. You remember? I remember very well. You said he's not the kind of guy who comes home with grease under his fingernails, gives you 6 or 7 kids, gets drunk every weekend, and screws you over when you put on a couple of pounds. You said, and I quote, he's a man who will provide for me and our children, be faithful to me, and provide a good life for us. He's a good man. You wanted something better, and you got it. And now you're nervous and dancing. I used to be proud of you, Emma, but now I wonder if you're just another idiot who's going to get divorced 4 or 5 times, drag home new boyfriends every few weeks, and make mom and dad cry when they think about the mess you've made of your life. Oh, Mark, grow up. I'm not stupid. I've been a mess. I played with Jake because it felt good to feel young again for one night. My husband should have grabbed me and made me behave, but I forgot who I was married to. He's angry now, but it will pass. It was one night and one fight. I'll come to him, give him some love, and it will pass. People don't break up over one quarrel. You bet they do, sister. You think because I build houses, I don't know anything about your dear husband? I have clients and partners whose children attend school with his. They talk about Alan. He's young, he has hair, he's smart, and many female students think he's cute. There were times when an A or even a C would get him. Let's just say he was popular. And then there were the female professors. One pursued him so openly that the dean had to tell her to chill out or face action. So go in there and do whatever you need to do. If you lose him, he won't sit around crying into his beer for long. Emma came back and stood at the entrance to the den for another long time. None of them said anything. Then she started to cross the den, heading towards Alan. He raised his hand. Wait, get a chair and sit over there by the TV. That surprised her. Alan could read it on her face. She was expecting him to come over now, to lead her to the bedroom, but it didn't happen. She took a deep breath. I know, Alan. I know I acted like a complete idiot at the party today. You don't need to read me the riot act. Everyone else has already done it. Jesus Christ, everybody acts like you're blood and I'm a stranger. But I've been drinking, you know that. And Jake, you know Jake and I have a history. We go way back, from elementary school. You know, he still loves me. He still hasn't gotten over the fact that I chose you to be my husband. I know it's wrong, but I feel sorry for him sometimes. And you're going to ease his pain by entertaining him? Anger flashed in her eyes. He's in pain. A little flirting makes him feel better. Nothing else was supposed to happen until you came in like a big man and started acting out. You didn't have to do that. He's a friend, and you're my husband, the man I love. After another moment, she sat down in the straight back chair. It wasn't the most comfortable in the world, which was what Alan intended. I don't want to change the subject, Emma, but I'm curious about something. I left the campground around 8 p.m., and the phone didn't start ringing until 11 p.m. I know the campground is a big place, and there was a lot going on, but after that little incident, it took you 3 hours to realize I was nowhere to be found. You must have really felt guilty about what happened since you realized it only took 3 hours for me to disappear. I think if we hadn't had that little party, you wouldn't have realized I was missing until the next morning. That speaks volumes about how important I am in your life. Anger flashed in her eyes, and she was about to say something when she suddenly came to her senses and stopped. My God, Alan, you don't know, do you? Know what? All hell broke loose after you left. I forgot about you. Everyone forgot for a while, but that doesn't mean I don't care about you. It's just, enough. What happened after? After Jake and I did a little dance? I know I shouldn't have done it, but I was so damn mad at you. I know you don't fight, but... God, it sounds like I'm 13 years old, but I was hurt that you didn't take a swing at Jake. If he had taken a swing at you, I would have been there for you, loving and comforting you. I wanted that. You're my husband, but you left. So yes, I was furious. I danced with him. And you know Jake, he was drunk. So after a few minutes, he went to pee. Knowing Jake, I figured he would either go to the lake or behind one of the cabins. So, I talked to a few people and thought nothing more of Jake for a while. After about half an hour, I started wondering where he had gone. I wasn't worried about you because you usually disappeared, and we didn't meet until closer to the evening. Then I heard a scream, and everyone started running towards the lake. People crowded around a man lying on the ground. I tried to get closer and then realized it was Jake. It was horrible. His face was covered in blood, one eye was swollen shut, and I was told his arm and several fingers were broken. Dave and the others were talking to him, and I heard them say someone should call the sheriff. 3 bikers had gotten in Jake's face, talking about how he had ruined their party. When they started to argue, all 3 jumped on Jake. He said some of them would be limping and sore for a while, but there were too many of them. That's when things went downhill. We called a rescue for Jake, and the sheriff's office sent 3 cars. They were checking the park to see if any bikers or anyone else was still there. And then, after a while, they started checking to make sure everyone was in place. Alan took in what she was telling him, and the obvious question came to mind. And yet it took you 3 hours in total, and sometime after you knew there were some nasty bikers roaming the park, to wonder where your beloved husband had gone. I repeat, I must really rank high on your list of important people. She bit her lip and didn't look at him. It hit him. You weren't at the park, were you? You wanted to go with Jake to the hospital. You had to hold his hand, didn't you? She finally looked at him. He was pretty beat up, Alan. He was in pain, and he asked me if I would go with him. I couldn't say no. You couldn't. There seems to be a pattern of behavior developing. You just can't say no to Jake. Don't do that, Alan. It was a decent human thing to do. If you weren't so angry with me, you'd know that. Of course, he was an old friend. An old friend you were having fun with before I came along. You must have been there for him in his time of need. You entertained him back then, didn't you? She looked at the floor, shook her head, and then met Alan's eyes again. Yes, Alan, you knew about it. We were serious back then, and I wasn't a little girl. We were having fun. Does that make you feel better? And before you ask, he was good. Very good. Does that make me a whore? What about you? Should I be jealous of every woman you've been with before me? No. That was then. This is now. Yes, he asked me to go with him, and I did. I held his hand, the one that didn't have broken fingers on it. We had an technician with us, and there were people around us every second while we were in the in Austin, getting him patched up. Nothing happened, Alan. And even if we had been alone, mocking me would have been the last thing on his mind. You have nothing to be jealous of. Did I say I was jealous? You don't need to be. I can see it in your face every time he's around me. I guess I can't blame you. If you were always with another woman that I knew you were with, it would eat me up. Do you ever think about me? She lowered her eyes again and didn't look him in the eye. Alan, you know that's not a fair question. So much has been going on. Jake was hurt, everyone was calling everyone else, so the answer is no. When and who finally started taking an interest in me? She continued to stare at the floor. Jake was treated, and his brother came to take him home. I went back to the campground with Kelly and Billy. When I got there, Dad came up to me and asked if I'd seen you. That's wonderful, Emma. Your father thinks enough of me to remember I'm missing before my wife does. She looked up at Alan, and he could see tears glistening in her eyes. Keep it up, Alan. I screwed up, and you're going to hurt me as much as you can for what I did, okay? Now I feel even shittier. I'm sorry. I guess your conscience is tormenting, isn't it? It's hard to tell because I didn't touch you. She just looked at Alan and lowered her gaze to the floor again. For a moment, they were both silent. Well, at least we've cleared that up, dear, Alan said. She looked at him with a puzzled expression on her face. What? I stayed here because I wanted to be able to talk to you before I left. Leave? Where were you going? You're not still mad at me, are you? Alan looked at her, dirty, disheveled, with blood on her white dress, and thought that he had never seen anything so beautiful before and never would again. I have an errand to run that I've been putting off until I had a chance to talk to you. Then I'm going to find a place to stay for the night, some cheap motel. And on Monday, I'll be arranging for a permanent residence and meeting with a lawyer. A place for an overnight stay with a lawyer? Alan, are you out of your mind? What are you talking about? Did we just have a fight, badly? But I love you. People don't break up over one fight. What happened to you, Alan? We were happy this morning. What could have happened in less than 24 hours to make you want to leave me? Alan didn't answer her, just pointed down the hallway leading to the kids' bedrooms. Go, he said. She slowly got up and walked to the other room. He knew she would see the suitcases, the laptop, his briefcase. She came back into the room even more slowly, shaking her head like she couldn't believe what she saw. You're out of your mind, Alan. You're abandoning me and our 2 sons because of one fight? Because of one stupid mistake I made when I got drunk a few hours ago? I didn't have sex with anyone. I didn't betray you. You're just obsessed. When Alan didn't respond, she started to move closer to him, and he raised his hand again to stop her. She backed away but didn't sit down. Can you tell me why? Can't you at least do that? I had a moment of clarity, Alan said. Emma could see she had no idea what he was talking about. A moment of clarity? Why are you doing this, Alan? I know you think you're smarter than me, everyone in my family, everyone around you, but why can't you not rub our noses in the fact that we're idiots compared to you? Say it in words I can understand. She was right. Alan had taken his intellectual superiority over Emma and her family for granted too much. He didn't realize what an ass he was just because he worked with his head instead of his hands and surpassed everyone in Emma's family in education. I'm sorry, Emma. I really am. I didn't mean to do it that way. It's just what English literature professors think and say. It's really not that hard to explain. We all go around and around, never really understanding what the point of our lives is. We are blinded by all the minutiae of our existence, waking up, brushing our teeth, going to work, paying bills, and wondering what's on TV today, if the kids have colds, if we're getting fat, and if our spouses are looking at other people. We never step back and look at our lives except once in a while. Alan paused for a moment, then added, I had a moment of clarity tonight. You keep saying that, but what does it mean? What did you see? Alan had to squeeze the words out of himself. It was the hardest speech he had ever given and ever would give because he knew he was killing their life together, killing his life with the 2 boys he loved more than life itself. But she deserved to know why he was leaving. I've seen our life, Emma. I've seen who we are, who we were, and who we've become. It has nothing to do, or very little to do, with what happened at the party. You're right, leaving because of one fight, one mistake, one incident would be crazy. But that's not why I'm leaving. I'm leaving because I've realized our marriage was a mistake, that I love you but you don't love me, that I've never satisfied and probably never will satisfy you sexually the way you need me to. Deep down, you're a good woman and will never leave me because you keep your promises. But we're too young to ruin each other's lives for the next 40 or 50 years. That's why I'll leave when we finish our conversation. She shook her head again, and this time the tears did flow. Alan knew she was crying for a life that was ending, just like he was. Just because she didn't love him the way he loved her didn't mean there was no love there. There just wasn't enough of it. How can you say things like that, Alan? How can you be so cruel? Look at me, Emma. Answer me 2 questions, and if I'm wrong, I'll rethink what I said. A look of fear appeared on her face, and Alan realized that she somehow knew what he was about to ask her. Have you ever cheated on me, Emma? Have you been with another man since we got married? She fell silent. The look on her face answered the question. Thank you. That's one of the reasons I love you. You could lie or try to tell half-truths, but you're too good a woman. You can't lie, and you don't want to tell me the truth, which you know would break my heart. But we both know the answer to that question. You just answered it. The silence is eloquent. And the second question. Do you love me, Emma? I love you, Alan. How the hell can you ask me that? It doesn't matter. What you need to know is that I love you. That's not what I asked, Emma. Do you love me? I don't understand. You love your father and your mother, our boys, our brothers and sisters. I know you would give your life for them, but being loved is different. It's when you catch your breath when you look at a man who makes your heart beat fast when he kisses you, who you dream of and want when he's not around. That's what I feel for you. I don't know if you had those feelings for me when we were married, but I know you don't feel that way now. You'd be a good sister to me, but you're not a wife. Is that all? She stood up and headed toward him. Is it really all about sex, Alan? Is that really what it's all about? You're sorry because I'm not some whore in bed with you? Alan got up and went into the light to meet her. When he walked into the light, she caught her breath and backed up. Oh my God, she gasped. She stopped backing away, reached out a trembling hand, and gently touched one side of his face, her fingers gently brushing over the swollen flesh surrounding his nearly closed left eye. Alan knew the rest of his face was made up of various shades of yellow, red, and brown, his lips swollen except for a piece missing from the left side. "Oh my God, they found you and beat you up too. Why didn't you go to the hospital for medical attention?" Alan tried to smile, and that in itself had to be scary as hell judging by the look on Emma's face. "You should look at the other guy." Emma understood what his expression meant. Alan's expression slowly made its way across her face. She was horrified. Alan stood in the dark by the lake, listening to the music and imagining he could still hear the laughter of the people around Emma and Jake. He didn't need to go back to realize she was dancing with him. Alan could have gone back and confronted Jake face to face. He had been beaten before, back in the days when he was running around the streets of South Boston as a wild child without a father. He had been beaten a lot when he was a lowly shrimp trying to hang around with teenagers until his mother finally wised up and moved them to a small town south of Boston away from the gangs. Alan didn't mind a beating if it came to that, and it probably would have come to that because he didn't kid himself that he could beat Jake in a fair fight. Jake was bigger, stronger, and undoubtedly tougher than a guy who made a living standing in a classroom and lecturing. But it was the look in Emma's eyes when she dared him to do something about Jake's insults, the way she let him put his arms around her and stroke her, the way his hands roamed lightly and familiarly over her. Alan guessed he'd always known it, but now he couldn't bring himself to ignore the truth that Jake was entertaining her. Somewhere, another man was occupying the center of Alan's life, and she was sharing things with him that she would never have shared with Alan. How could you live when everything is built on lies? Leaning against a tree, Alan looked up into the overcast night sky and wondered how he could turn a life that had gone off the rails and make it right again. How could he forgive a woman who had become everything to him when she gave her body and perhaps her love to another man? Alan wondered if they laughed at him when they were together. He heard a body stumbling through the weeds and bouncing off the trees as someone staggered toward the lake, stopping a dozen feet away from him, facing the dark lake. He didn't even look back at Alan. Even from the rear, Alan knew who it was. "I punched him. I'll be damned, Alan. I didn't think you were capable of that, you wimp. Sure, you had to sneak up on me, but at least you had the guts to try to hit me. But now I'm going to hurt you, really hurt you, boy. And I'll be right because I'll tell everyone, including Emma, how you hit me. We fought for a long time, but I still prevailed." Alan grabbed him and said, "I'm going to ask you some questions, Jake, and you're going to tell me the truth." Jake finally nodded and then said softly, "You're on top, Alan, so I'll tell you anything you want to know. But there will come a day when I'm on top, and when I do, I think you'll just disappear. No one will ever know what happened to you. Maybe, but right now, I want to know how long you've been entertaining Emma." Jake was silent for a moment. "This time or before? I already know you've been entertaining her since we met. That is, since we got married." "About 4 years. 4 years, yes. How? How did it happen? How often?" Jake smiled gloatingly, but the smile immediately disappeared, and Alan believed his words. "I've been stalking her since the day you married her. I tried everything, showing up at her work, just dropping by the house, playing sad, trying to make her laugh. But she would never cheat on you. It was driving me crazy. One day, about 4 to 4.5 years ago, she came up to me as I was leaving a 7-Eleven store. She wasn't smiling or flirty, but she asked if I wanted to go out for coffee. We didn't do anything that day or for another 6 months, but she looked after me. Then one day, we ended up at my house. That's when it all happened, and it's been like that for the last 4 years. Every 3 or 4 months, she comes over, we have fun for a day or two, and then she goes back to your place like it never happened." Alan tried to make sense of what Jake was telling him. This wasn't just a one-night stand. It had been 4 years, 4 goddamn years she'd been stabbing him in the back, enjoying life with a guy who didn't have grease under his fingernails and provided her with a good life, and all she had to do was put up with his boring entertainment. "So she stayed with me for the money, is that it?" Jake groaned softly and then surprised Alan by laughing. "You're a goddamn idiot. You don't get it, do you? What don't I understand? She never needed your money, idiot. I drive a backhoe and make almost as much as you do, if you believe what she once told me in bed. And you know Robert and Becky set it up so they could split all their money before she died. In a few years, she'll be able to buy and sell you, idiot. You're no goddamn prize in terms of money. Then why? She loves you, you goddamn idiot. Why? I'll never know. She loves me? Is that why she's having fun with you? Jesus Christ, you don't understand, do you? She's just bored with you. She wants to have some real fun. You can't give her what I can give her. You're the one who ruined everything. She was going to marry me, you know she was. Those 2 boys of yours would have been mine. She loved me, or she would have. We'd been together since junior high. We were the same people. We would have been happy. Then you show up with your smart mouth and your good looks, talking about things she'd never seen or imagined, and you tricked her into thinking you were the right man for her. Alan looked at Jake again. You stupid bastard. I'm the best thing that ever happened to her. You just couldn't handle the fact that I took her away from you. Yeah, I guess you're right, smartass. And look how happy it made her and everyone else too. She tried to love you and live without fun, tried to stay in a marriage that was killing her. I lost the woman I loved and should have had. I should have been sneaking around with her and seeing her go home with you from those parties. And you poor bastard. With those words, Alan made sure Jake could never have fun again. He won't go into detail about what exactly he did, but believe him when he says that Jake is forever deprived of having fun with the opposite sex. Emma just stared at Alan. He told me everything, Emma, and I believed him. People don't usually lie when you snap their fingers. Oh my God, 4 years. 4 years, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Alan couldn't believe it. Part of him hated her, but a bigger part still loved her. No, baby, maybe a little, but that's not the point. It's hard to explain. It's been like this since the very first time we did it. No other man has ever had this effect on me. It's not that, but it's the closest thing I can explain, and I think maybe if I told you that, it would bore you to tears. So why didn't you leave me if he was so wonderful? He wasn't. This fun with him was wonderful. I love you, Emma said. Alan reached out and touched her face, wiping away a tear. I know you're not in love with me, but I believe you love me in our marriage. But I left the rest unspoken, walked around her, and began moving my luggage and laptop into our family Saturn. I was keeping the more spacious Ford Escort for her and the kids. It took me 3 trips, but finally, I was done and back in the house. She didn't seem to move from her seat. She reached out her hands to grab him, but they stayed hanging in the air. I don't want this, baby. I don't know how, but there has to be some way to make this right. Not really. Our marriage is over. I want to see the boys and be a part of their lives, but this is gone. Because you hate me. Alan looked into her sparkling eyes. No, I love you. That's why it's so hard. But you can't breathe life into a corpse. We can go to counseling, see a therapist, anything. We won't go because deep down, you don't want to be married to me anymore. I don't think you believe anything can work out between us. How can you say that? Remember, I said that silence is eloquent. Sometimes silence says more than words. I know you don't really want to save our marriage because ever since I let you know I was leaving, you still haven't said 2 things that would show me that you still need me. Those are the first things I would have told you, but they never came out of your mouth. They looked at each other, and the question was clear in her eyes. You never said, don't go, please don't go. When it finally came to her, she fell to her knees and cradled her face in her hands. She was crying as Alan walked out the door. As Alan walked out the door, he felt a mixture of relief and sorrow. The night air was cool against his face, a stark contrast to the warmth inside the house he had just left. The weight of his decision bore down on him, but he knew it was the right thing to do. The betrayal he felt was too deep, and staying in a loveless marriage would only prolong the pain for both of them. He loaded the last of his luggage into the Saturn and took a moment to look back at the house. Memories of better times flooded his mind. The first day they moved in, the laughter of his children, the holidays spent together. But those memories were now tainted by the knowledge of Emma's betrayal. He had to move forward, for his own sake and for the sake of his children. Alan got into the car and started the engine. The sound of the motor was oddly comforting, a reminder that life goes on. He pulled out of the driveway and drove away, leaving behind a chapter of his life that he could never return to. He checked into a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. The room was small and sparsely furnished, but it was clean and quiet. Alan sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of the day's events. He knew he needed to rest, but his mind was racing with thoughts of what the future held. The next morning, Alan woke up early. He felt a strange sense of freedom, despite the lingering pain of the previous night. He had a lot to do. Find a new place to live, meet with a lawyer, and most importantly, figure out how to be there for his sons during this difficult time. He decided to start by finding an apartment. After a few hours of searching online and making phone calls, he found a place that seemed suitable. It was a modest one-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood, not too far from his job at the college. He made an appointment to see it that afternoon. The landlord, Mrs. Anderson, was a kind elderly woman who seemed genuinely concerned about Alan's situation. She showed him around the apartment, pointing out the features and answering his questions. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was clean and comfortable. Alan decided to take it. With the apartment secured, Alan's next step was to meet with a lawyer. He had done some research and found a reputable family law attorney named Mr. Benson. He called and scheduled an appointment for the next day. The following morning, Alan walked into Mr. Benson's office, feeling a mixture of anxiety and determination. Mr. Benson greeted him with a firm handshake and a warm smile. "Good morning, Alan. Please, have a seat," Mr. Benson said, gesturing to a chair in front of his desk. "I understand you're going through a tough time right now. How can I help?" Alan took a deep breath and began to explain his situation. He told Mr. Benson about Emma's infidelity, the decision to leave, and his concerns about the future, especially regarding his children. Mr. Benson listened attentively, occasionally nodding and taking notes. When Alan finished, the lawyer leaned back in his chair and sighed. "I'm sorry to hear about what you're going through, Alan. Divorce is never easy, especially when children are involved. But it sounds like you're making the right decision for yourself and your kids. Here's what we'll do. We'll file for divorce on the grounds of infidelity, and we'll work to secure your rights as a father. Do you have any documentation or evidence of the infidelity?" Alan nodded and pulled out a folder from his briefcase. "I have text messages, emails, and some other evidence that proves the affair has been going on for years." Mr. Benson took the folder and skimmed through the contents. "This is good. It will definitely help our case. We'll also need to discuss custody arrangements. What are your thoughts on that?" "I want joint custody. I want to be there for my sons as much as possible," Alan said firmly. "That's a reasonable request. Given the circumstances, I don't see why we shouldn't be able to secure joint custody. I'll start drafting the necessary paperwork, and we'll get the process moving. It's going to be a challenging journey, but I'll be with you every step of the way." Alan felt a sense of relief wash over him. Having a plan in place and knowing he had someone on his side made the situation seem a bit more manageable. Over the next few weeks, Alan began to adjust to his new life. The apartment started to feel like home as he unpacked his belongings and settled in. He kept busy with work, finding solace in the familiar routine of teaching and interacting with his students. Despite the challenges, Alan made an effort to maintain a positive relationship with Emma for the sake of their sons. They worked out a schedule for visitation, and Alan cherished the time he spent with Billy and David. He made sure to be present at their school events and sports games, showing them that, despite the changes, he would always be there for them. The divorce proceedings moved forward, and though there were moments of tension and conflict, both Alan and Emma tried to handle things as amicably as possible. They both knew that the well-being of their children was the most important thing. Alan also began to reconnect with old friends and make new ones. He found a support system in his colleagues and neighbors, who offered him encouragement and companionship. Slowly but surely, Alan started to rebuild his life. One evening, while organizing his apartment, Alan came across a box of old books he had collected over the years. Among them were some of his favorite works of literature that had inspired him to become an English professor. He realized that he had been so consumed by his personal struggles that he had neglected his passion for reading and writing. He decided to make time for himself and rediscover the things he loved. He began writing again, something he hadn't done in years. It started as a form of therapy, a way to process his emotions and make sense of everything that had happened. But as he continued, he found joy in creating stories and expressing himself through words. Alan also joined a local book club, where he met people who shared his love for literature. The discussions and interactions with fellow book lovers reignited his enthusiasm for his profession and reminded him of the importance of pursuing one's passions. Months passed, and Alan's life gradually took on a new normal. The divorce was finalized, and he and Emma found a way to co-parent their children effectively. There were still difficult moments, but they both worked hard to ensure Billy and David felt loved and supported. One afternoon, Alan received a letter from Emma. It was unexpected, and as he opened it, he felt a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Inside, Emma had written a heartfelt apology, acknowledging her mistakes and expressing regret for the pain she had caused him. She thanked him for being a good father and for handling the situation with grace. Reading the letter, Alan felt a sense of closure. He knew that forgiving Emma completely would take time, but her words allowed him to begin letting go of the anger and resentment he had been holding onto. He realized that holding onto the past would only hinder his progress and happiness. With a deep breath, Alan folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. It was time to fully embrace his new life and the possibilities that lay ahead. Alan continued to focus on his career, his children, and his personal growth. He set new goals for himself, both professionally and personally. He started to see a therapist to help navigate the emotional complexities of his situation and to ensure he was the best version of himself for his sons. One evening, while attending a literary event in town, Alan met Sarah, a fellow book enthusiast and writer. They struck up a conversation about their favorite authors and quickly discovered they had much in common. Over time, their friendship blossomed into something more. Sarah was kind, understanding, and supportive. She respected Alan's past and was patient as he navigated his feelings. Their relationship developed slowly, built on trust and mutual respect. For the first time in a long while, Alan felt hopeful about the future. As the years went by, Alan and Sarah's relationship deepened. They shared their love of literature, explored new places, and created cherished memories together. Billy and David grew up knowing that they were loved by both their parents and that their father had found happiness again. Looking back, Alan saw his journey as one of growth and resilience. The pain and betrayal he had experienced had been transformative, forcing him to confront his vulnerabilities and rebuild his life from the ground up. Through it all, he had learned valuable lessons about love, forgiveness, and the importance of staying true to oneself. Alan reflected on the key lessons he had learned. Value and cherish relationships. Always value and nurture relationships with loved ones. Open communication and honesty are crucial in maintaining a healthy bond. Be true to yourself. Never compromise your values or self-worth. Stay true to who you are and seek partners who respect and appreciate you for it. Forgiveness is powerful. Forgiving others and yourself can be incredibly freeing. Holding on to anger and resentment only prolongs pain and hinders personal growth. Embrace new beginnings. Life is full of challenges, but each ending brings the opportunity for a new beginning. Embrace change and look forward to new possibilities. Pursue your passions. Never neglect the things that bring you joy and fulfillment. Pursuing your passions can be a source of comfort and happiness, especially during difficult times. Support system matters. Surround yourself with supportive friends and family. They can provide the strength and encouragement needed to overcome life's challenges. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey through a moment of clarity, confronting the heartbreak of a cheating wife. We hope Alan's story resonated with you, highlighting the complexities of love, betrayal, and personal growth. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and leave a comment below with your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to Storytime Audio and hit the notification bell, so you never miss out on our latest tales that inspire and entertain. Stay tuned for more captivating stories, and remember, every ending is just a new beginning. Until next time, keep listening and keep imagining.